This car marks the beginning of the downward cycle for American muscle cars. The worst performing cars no longer deserve the title muscle cars. Here are the 10 worst muscle cars of the 1970s. Hydrate yourself and join us on the journey of exploring muscle cars. Positioned strategically between the mass-market Ford and the opulent Lincoln, Mercury was once a powerhouse under the Ford Motor Company umbrella. This subsidiary manufactured outstanding machines like the Mercury Comet or the Mercury Marauder. The brand seemed destined for greatness, yet fate decided otherwise, and the Mercury division would eventually close its doors forever in 2011. In the current market, the 1972 Mercury Montego is often cited as a used muscle car to avoid, unless you stumble upon the rare Cyclone option. Produced for a limited time, the 1972 Mercury Montego GT represents the top of the line. Under the hood, it features the 429 cubic inch V8. This powertrain is capable of churning out 208 horsepower at 4,400 revolutions per minute and 322 pound-feet of torque at 2,600 revolutions per minute. It is the exact same engine found in its corporate twin, the Ford Gran Torino Sport. However, do raw specifications tell the whole story? Just because the Mercury Montego GT and its 429 cubic inch V8 only produced a net 208 horsepower during the malaise era, does that mean we should undervalue this machine? Or does it still deserve to be a true wild horse for its bold design and historical legacy? Comment why, if you agree with us. Most American manufacturers attempted to design a sportier vehicle during the Golden Age. At Mercury, things truly heated up in 1967 when the legendary Mercury Cougar arrived at dealerships. Initially, Mercury's pony car was considered even sexier than the Ford Mustang. The brand upped the ante by introducing the monstrous Mercury Cougar Eliminator. The Mercury Cougar XR7 used to be a fantastic alternative to the Ford Mustang GT. Back in 1968, the top-line Mercury Cougar XR7 utilized the same 390 cubic inch V8, capable of producing 325 horsepower. However, by 1972, things took a drastic turn. The car departed from its sporty body, resembling a land boat. The 1972 Mercury Cougar was now heavier and slower, at best. The Mercury Cougar XR7 was offered with a 351 cubic inch V8 that made 266 horsepower at 5,400 revolutions per minute and 301 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. This shift from the formidable Eliminator to a sluggish cruiser sparked debates on whether Mercury had betrayed the muscle car spirit. Comment N if you believe we have presented a biased viewpoint. When classic muscle cars are discussed, the usual suspects always come to mind. Very few enthusiasts think of AMC. Yet, AMC was a true contender in the 60s and 70s. In 1966, the mighty Dodge Charger itself was positioned directly against the similar Rambler Marlin. The Rambler Marlin was not the only remarkable machine. The Hornet SC 360 and the AMC AMX are prime examples that the brand was not all bark. However, the oil shock of 1973 impacted everyone. Although not as severe as others, the 1974 Javelin AMX was a far cry from being as rambunctious as its predecessors. The top-line Javelin AMX with the Go package features a 401 cubic inch V8. This engine is rated at 235 horsepower at 4,600 revolutions per minute and 345 pound-feet of torque at 3,300 revolutions per minute. Comparing the Rambler Marlin to the legendary Dodge Charger in 1966 seems uneven. Can the AMC really compete? We look forward to your opinion. The Plymouth Barracuda stands as one of the vehicles that defined the muscle car era. First introduced in 1964, the Plymouth Barracuda would quickly become one of the coolest Mopars on the market. Its smaller and sportier body conquered the hearts of muscleheads nationwide. The third-generation Plymouth Barracuda truly left its mark on the domestic automobile industry. However, the 1974 Plymouth Cuda represents the very last model ever produced. Instead of dragging this legend through the mud, Plymouth decided to cease production and end on a relatively good note. While the 1974 Plymouth Cuda might resemble its predecessors, things take a turn for the worse once the hood is popped. The legendary 426 gave way to a much smaller 360 cubic inch V8. This engine is rated at 245 horsepower at 4,800 revolutions per minute and 320 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. The reduction in engine power officially marked the end of the glory days for the Plymouth Barracuda muscle car line. Many enthusiasts expressed regret at witnessing the departure of this powerful lineup. How about you? Are you truly a muscle car enthusiast? In 1953, Chevrolet released the Corvette to compete against imported European roadsters. Following the massive success of the Ford Mustang, Chevrolet designed its own pony car. The Chevy Camaro immediately became the main rival. Since 1967, the Chevy Camaro has been the go-to alternative. The second-generation Chevy Camaro is often believed to be the best classic iteration. While models from 1970 and 71 are amazing, the 1975 Chevy Camaro is considered downright bad. Despite its sporty looks, it was all bark and no bite. Crucially, the famous Chevy Camaro Z28 package was no longer offered. The best option available was the 350 cubic inch LM, one small block V8. This engine was rated at a mere 155 horsepower at 3,800 revolutions per minute and 250 pound-feet of torque at 2,400 revolutions per minute. However, many disagree that the 1975 Chevy Camaro was a total failure. Although the 350 cubic inch V8 producing only 155 horsepower was weak, it was necessary during the energy crisis. Automakers simply could not defy government policies. Comment 1 to let us know that you're still watching our video. Dodge always showed its fierce desire to beat the competition on both the oval and the drag strip. In 1966, the brand released the legendary Dodge Charger to compete directly against the AMC Rambler Marlin in the same market segment. However, it would not be until 1970 that the Dodge Charger would truly grow into the remarkable muscle car it once was. Unfortunately, the model lost its appeal around the mid-70s. The 1969 Dodge Charger 426 Hemi was an absolute beast. It was an all-American monster made to tear up the track. However, things changed drastically in 1976. The Dodge Charger moved away from the sporty look. The top-line Dodge Charger Daytona received a 400 cubic inch V8. This engine made 185 horsepower at 3,600 revolutions per minute and 285 pound-feet of torque at 3,200 revolutions per minute. While these numbers were not bad for 1976, the Daytona does not live up to its predecessor's reputation. The Dodge Charger experienced a significant roller coaster ride, reflecting the general trend in the American automotive industry and the influence of economic factors. America's most popular pony car, the Ford Mustang, conquered the hearts of both piston heads and regular people alike. Beautifully designed, decently powered, and relatively affordable, the success of the Ford Mustang is warranted. However, the model went through a couple of rough patches. One of the worst moments took place in the mid-70s. The 1976 Ford Mustang II is arguably one of the worst-looking muscle cars no self-respecting gearhead should drive. As if the car was not repulsive enough, Ford introduced the 2.3-liter Lima inline-4 engine. The Lima produced a miserable 92 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute and 121 pound-feet of torque at 3,000 revolutions per minute. Even the sportier and more aggressive Ford Mustang King Cobra was underwhelming. It came with a 302 cubic inch V8 rated at 134 horsepower at 3,600 revolutions per minute and 247 pound-feet of torque at 1,800 revolutions per minute. Clearly, the significant decline in design and performance of the 1976 Ford Mustang II damaged its long-standing legacy, reflecting the harsh economic factors of that time. Do you share the same viewpoint? Let me know. Buick is one of those American brands everyone forgot about, but that is still alive and thriving today. Back in the heyday of the American car, Buick built several great muscle cars like the Buick GSX, the Riviera, and the Buick Skylark. These cars tend to fetch hundreds of thousands of dollars at auctions, especially if they have the right vehicle identification numbers. However, some Buick cars released in the late 70s have numbers that most collectors do not even care to look up. Introduced in 1953 as the Roadmaster Skylark, the Buick Skylark would eventually acquire features that are proper to a muscle car in 1965. Unfortunately, the Buick Skylark's level of attractiveness greatly decreased, starting in 1975. By 1977, the Buick Skylark came at best with an Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch V8. This engine developed 170 horsepower at 3,200 revolutions per minute and 275 pound-feet of torque at 2,000 revolutions per minute. The decline in performance of the Buick Skylark in its later years has indeed tarnished its legacy. However, the earlier high-performance versions still hold high esteem and command premium prices. Are you still watching our video? Comment 9 to let me know you're a muscle car enthusiast. A plethora of muscle cars was released during the 60s and 70s. While several have been completely forgotten, a handful of nameplates remained popular among car enthusiasts. Names such as the Corvette, the Dodge Charger, or the Pontiac Trans Am are familiar to anyone with a liking for muscle cars. Pontiac was once rubbing elbows with today's most popular car brands. Pontiac manufactured instant classics like the Tempest, the Pontiac GTO, or the Pontiac Trans Am. With the Pontiac Trans Am being the crown jewel of the brand, it is quite normal that Pontiac did everything possible to navigate the tricky environment of the 70s. Though nothing like the Pontiac Trans Am of the beginning of the decade, the 1977 Pontiac Trans Am still looks gorgeous. Underneath the hood sits a 400 cubic inch V8. This engine cranks out 200 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute and 325 pound-feet of torque at 2,400 revolutions per minute. Though it is not bad for an American car made in 1977, the Pontiac Trans Am has a curb weight of 3,644 pounds. The rise and fall of the Pontiac Trans Am reflect the common challenges that American car manufacturers had to confront in the 1970s, such as the energy crisis and new environmental regulations. However, the legacy of the Pontiac Trans Am is still recognized and greatly contributes to the golden era of muscle cars in America. Chevrolet is most known for its Chevy Camaro and Corvette today. However, true connoisseurs know that Chevy used to have a decent number of attractive muscle cars in its lineup back in the 60s and 70s. The Chevy Chevelle and Chevy Nova are among those. When it comes to the Chevy Nova, the brand hit the nail on the head with the compact muscle car. First released in 1962, the Chevy Nova would eventually become more aggressive in 1968. The bigger Chevy Nova also came with bigger engines, such as the robust 396 cubic inch V8. However, in 1975, the Chevy Nova received a facelift that left the car disfigured. By 1979, the Chevy Nova was a shell of its old self. Fitted at best with a 350 cubic inch small block V8, rated at 165 horsepower, at 3,800 revolutions per minute, and 260 pound-feet of torque, at 2,400 revolutions per minute, the 1979 Chevy Nova is not the most prized model on the market. The decline of the Chevy Nova in its later years damaged the image of this particular car line. However, the earlier high-performance versions of the Chevy Nova are still recognized as some of the most successful compact muscle cars, contributing to the golden age of this car line. Above is the list of the 10 worst muscle cars of the 1970s that we compiled from various evaluation sources. You may not agree with this list, but all assessments are subjective. We hope you had an enjoyable experience watching this video. See you in the next one.